For the past year or so, the dissenting right has undergone a bit of an identity crisis. For those paying attention, this is a very rich irony for a movement that has identity as its central axis. Debates range from optics, tactics, strategy, to leadership, and every other facet imaginable among self-styled experts. We know that we have a destination in mind, but we don't know exactly how to get there, nor who should steer the ship. We know that to arrive, we must be able to convincingly assert the very messages which we are still struggling to articulate and then deliver to a shrinking audience that does not want to be persuaded of such things anyway. Time is not on our side to figure this out, and the stakes could not be higher, considering failure means the extinction of our people. The vessel can still be righted, but it is going to require the same three countermeasures that take a ship out of list: changing its angle of incline, shifting the center of gravity, and redistributing the weight. Our primary failure is not recognizing what we truly are or what our task actually is. We have allowed ourselves to be defined in a political sphere, but we are not merely asking society to change its politics. We are asking society to change its soul. We cannot make progress until we understand that we are not political reformers. We are religious reformers, and we must begin acting that way. In our current climate, we have no moral standing, and this, more than anything, relegates us to pariah status. People don't merely disagree with us, they see us as evil. And people don't debate evil, they crush it. There is no path forward that does not require this aspect to change before anything else can. To know the way out, we must know how and why we arrived at this point, so that we may correct the direction by first changing the angle of inclination from its current course. Angle of incline. By the mid-20th century, still reeling from the sheer volume of casualties from 2 consecutive continental wars, white nations began a process of restructuring their institutions and purging nationalistic tendencies among their native populations. In a spiritual awakening of sorts, European descended peoples explicitly identifying as a group became equated with atrocity: the Holocaust of Jews, slavery, segregation, colonialism, apartheid, subjugation, and the exploiters of resources. Our very identity became an original sin, and an endless source of guilt that could be accessed by those wishing to rub our noses in it. A new morality emerged to guide whites towards what they believed to be the pursuit of absolution. Strident positions on race, especially the wickedness of whites, became effectively a new religion that entrenched itself into every aspect of society and culture. European nations removed themselves from the underdeveloped world as colonial powers. In the US, the government began forcefully integrating racially separated populations and engaging in massive programs to address poverty and political disenfranchisement of blacks. All white nations opened their immigration policies to welcome non-white peoples from every corner of the globe to live among them as equals. Economic policies transitioned in scope over the decades from national to global. No longer was the primary focus of a nation protecting and growing a stable, prosperous native-born middle class so that they could enjoy comfortable, rewarding, family-oriented lives. The primary focus of European-descended people instead became uplifting the non-white world, while simultaneously wrestling away the ability of their own native populations to use democratic means to act in self-interest, lest they drift themselves again towards evil. Such were the demands of salvation. Nationalism was not defeated by changing people's minds through persuasive debate, academic argumentation, or empirical data. They were defeated first in warfare, and then by accessing white people's sense of justice and tugging their heartstrings. The public did not change intellectually. The moral axis was reoriented. Like it or not, fairly or unfairly, opponents of the post-World War II spiritual reckoning will forever be associated with these incidents, no matter how sound the reasoning of our critiques are of the ultimate consequences, up to and including our opposition to our own extermination. Ultimately, though, these punitive pressures are what is fueling the alt-right. Center of gravity. The moral underpinning of these post-World War II imperatives rapidly developed its own doctrine, and as an informal state religion, reaffirmed the creeds of its faith constantly through culture, institutional education, and pure enforced social custom. What we call the narrative is in fact a self-reinforcing creed of a very pious population practicing a faith that is just short of compulsory as a condition for civic life. The system itself is now in crisis because the position of high priest, the POTUS, is currently staffed by someone seen as insufficiently pious to the doctrine of this church. The clergy, otherwise known as the media, treat him with the legitimacy of an anti-pope for his blasphemies, border walls, anti-globalist language, his Muslim ban, among many others. We must understand now that we are reformers taking on a theocracy that draws its power precisely because the public sees its aims as morally justified and its critics as morally bankrupt. We have to recognize that there are few things historically as dangerous as a population convinced of its own moral certitude, and we must interact with it accordingly. When a society has entered that state of mind, it is incapable of self-regulating behavior. As reformists, we must begin engaging the system as though it were the 15th century Catholic Church, with the full cognizance of the pain that it can visit upon someone it identifies as a heretic. It has access to all state power. It has the ability to excommunicate individuals through a wide variety of tactics. It has the ability to engage in rigged prosecutions and trial proceedings. It deploys its own version of inquisitors, combating heresy by presenting as journalists. The agenteurs of the system feel very justified in carrying out these judgments, and they have no effective check on their power to do so, because they operate with the blessing of the state. Antifa are the modern equivalent of the townsfolk massing for a witch burning. Antagonistic public spectacles in such an atmosphere are suicidal, especially when participants have decided it is amusing to dress the part. The interesting thing about a liberal theocratic state is that it is very powerful right up to the instant that it is not. There is generally no singular event that brings it down, only cumulative things that build toward an initiation of the cascade. Like a dictatorship, when a theocracy falls, it is because it has already been discredited, and public support has eroded well before whatever catalyst ultimately nudges it over. It is the last to know that it has lost power. Our primary objective remains shifting the center of gravity. We must continue discrediting the foundations of morality from which this system postures and justifies its anti-white actions. A theocratic order loses its final leg once it has no ability to rule through fear, because after being exposed as a fraud, the Church has already emptied itself of zealots and true believers willing to enforce its diktats. We accomplish this by forcing the system to defend morally indefensible things. You see, ours is not the only vessel in full list right now. The liberal religious narrative is losing consensus on identity in the West, which is why its ministerial class considers controlling the discourse so important. They realize just how rabidly public sentiment can pivot, particularly should they be forced from a moral high ground with its priests pounding the podium impotently to vacant pews. They recognize just how intense the distrust and resentment coursing through the public is, and how tenuous their grasp is should it have to compete in an arena of ideas. They realize that they can still lose, which is why there is so much anxiety in how exactly to deal with us and our ideas. We simply just have to believe we can win, and like reformists before us, then work tirelessly and strategically to achieve it. Now is the time to press our efforts and tip their ship from list to capsize, just as we are writing ours. Redistribution of weight. The nature of warfare is that each battle is a fluid situation requiring real-time adjustments. Tacticians understand that he who fights the previous war loses. 2016 was fun. We all had a great time shifting the dialogue and moving the Overton window. But being bold and shocking only works for so long. People will cease to find it intriguing. Shock is only a tactic, not a long-term strategy. The more it is used, the less effective it becomes. We claimed a beachhead, but there must be a second wave of more conventional reinforcements for our guys to take more ideological territory. The true strength of the culture of the white man, more than any other historical group, is that it has always streamed a constant, renewing supply of minds capable of first imagining, then ordering and expressing higher concepts and ideas. No other race has shown the willingness to challenge his own institutions and social structures with every generation, and then force those things to validate themselves as just. When those structures have failed to do so, the white man replaces them, whereas other groups never even ask those questions. This, more than anything, is what scares the shit out of the hostile liberal elite, and is ultimately behind the desire to rid the planet of us. We are the genetic stock that changes the world. Stasis, with them permanently on top, is a world rid of our disruptive tendencies. Ours is a movement that is naturally attractive to those who are bright and discontented. It is populated by those who recognize something is fundamentally wrong, and they have the duty to change it. There are statesmen in the mold of George Washington, philosophers such as Aristotle, writers in the mold of Chaucer, Dickens, or Hugo, satirists in the mold of Aristophanes and Swift, and strategists such as Napoleon and Alexander. They are already in our ranks. We have the ability to unlock minds and put the oppressive, liberal religion of the 21st century in the rearview mirror. This happens when the listing ship is righted by altering its incline, its center of gravity, and its weight. If we all push together, directing the bow towards a new horizon, our upright vessel's destination will be the stars. and a new renaissance.